Well, the identity part of the lab's name is based on the social identity theory tradition, which recognizes that people aren't just individuals, but we're members of groups, and those groups are important to us, and they have really profound consequences for how we relate to other people and how we act in the world. When we think of ourselves in group terms, we will often do things for the benefit of that group and in ways that are consistent with that group's goals, even at some personal sacrifice to ourselves, where the sort of group order goals become more important than my personal preferences and what I individually might want. So that's an important theory when we're interested in topics of social justice and intergroup relations, because we need to understand, how is it that people come to see themselves and define themselves in group terms, and how does that then affect their behavior? It's a variable, it's a process that is at work in a lot of social phenomenon that I think we all care about. One thing that I do want to say is that I'm the director of the SISC lab, but I'm not the reason why the lab is the way that it is today. Really, that's due to my grad students, postdocs, my honor students, lab coordinators, and research assistants who have been a part of the lab over the years and really contributed to the development and growth of who we are as a lab. And I feel really grateful that I've been able to work with so many amazing people. Well, I think in our lab, we really try hard to choose research topics that we believe, however indirectly, can promote social justice. So that's true in our work on environmental sustainability and climate change as well, because we believe those are also justice issues. So recognizing that we live in an unjust world full of equality does shape the kind of research that we do, the kinds of research questions that we ask, the methods that we choose, and how we interpret results. So for example, in our work on climate change, we don't see human inaction on climate change as being due to people being poor consumers, or there being something about our psychological makeup that prevents us from taking action. But really, we believe that the reason why we failed as a species is because elites, powerful individuals and groups, have actively misled the general public through misinformation. And those groups have actively stood in the way of change that most people around the world would have supported and still support today. So that means we need to think beyond people as individual consumers, but we need to think about what leads people to join social movements and to support or participate in social activism to bring about social change and change power relations in such a way that I believe that humanity's care for the planet and desire to sustain the planet can actually become a reality if we change who has access to power. So that's why we research things like activism and what are the psychological and the social processes that would lead someone to want to participate in environmental activism. We think very strongly that it's environmental activism that's really, if we're going to respond in a positive and meaningful way to climate change and other environmental issues, that it's activism and social movements that are going to bring that about. It's not going to come from the top down from people that have power now, but it's going to come from people coming together and asserting their collective power to make the world a just and more sustainable place. Some of the work that we're engaged in the lab is on what we call cognitive alternatives, which is basically whether or not people can imagine humans living in a different way than they are now and really be able to picture it. I think that's really hard for a lot of people. They see the way that the world is now and they imagine that that's kind of the way that the world always has to be. And so we're interested in, well, what happens if people do have the capability of imagining a different kind of system, and one that would be both more sustainable and more just. There's a lot of people who are interested in doing something for the environment, caring for the environment, but they don't really know what they might be able to do as an individual, and maybe they're not doing very much as an individual. I actually think that in some ways, them trying to do things just as an individual is probably a recipe for failure, that it's not going to really lead to much sort of behavior change, and that it could also feel quite isolating. If people really care about doing something for the environment, find other people that you can make changes with. Either find a social network that you can be a part of, where other people are trying to eat a more of a plant-based diet, or are trying to reduce their carbon emissions in some other kind of way. But I think that for people, especially people that are feeling really anxious about climate change and really wanting to make a difference, I think the best thing that they can do is to find groups of people that are working really hard to try to create social change in ways that will protect the environment, and to work with other people in those groups. We need to have social change. This is way more than about our individual consumption behaviors. And if you are feeling anxiety or despair about the state of the environment, finding other people to build relationships with and do good work is the best way to protect your own well-being. That's maybe not the only, that shouldn't be the only reason to do it. But it's really through those relationships where we feel like we can start to have some real effect in the world. And those relationships also help us build some resilience, which we all need in the world that we're living in today. And we especially need resilience if we're going to be taking on some really big challenges and trying to promote social change. Making this into something that's beyond just you as an individual, sometimes can be as simple as talking to a friend and saying, hey, I'm thinking about making this change. You want to make this change with me? When you've got somebody else that is working with you to achieve some kind of goal, you're going to be much more likely to follow through, and you're going to be strengthening that relationship as well. So I think that idea of not trying to do it alone, not trying to do it as an individual, really applies for everything from just people we're friends with and trying to get them to come on board and make pro-environmental changes in their life at the same time you're making some in yours, all the way to joining activist groups and getting involved in collective action. Another really simple but important thing that people can do is have conversations with other people about climate change or other environmental issues. In some ways we might wonder why, and this is a question that Greta Thunberg asks, like, why isn't this on the news every night? Why aren't people talking about this all the time? And I think there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. But there's there is research to show that when people have conversations with others, then about climate change, that they're more likely to be thinking about climate change more of the time, and they influence other people to start to see climate change as a more important issue. Just talking about something helps people to understand that it's an important issue. And I think that there are a lot of people who still aren't having those conversations on a regular basis. And that's sometimes a good place to start, is just talk to other people about climate change and what it means to them, and what kind of role you might be able to have in addressing it. One thing that is interesting about our lab is that we have a range of methodologies that we use. So everything from quantitative meta-analysis to more qualitative studies that don't rely on numbers at all. We do lab-based experiments, surveys, and we also have had students in the lab doing community-based participatory studies. So we really rely on a range of methodologies to address these different questions. And I think that that's something that makes our lab fairly unique. Yeah, I think we're doing okay. The kind of research that we do, and as social psychologists, like, things are a little bit easier to do remotely. It's not like we have to collect any bodily fluids from anyone, or get any kind of physiological data. Um, so, and I think social psychologists have, in some ways, kind of pioneered data collection via the internet um, well before COVID happened. So it does make certain kinds of research not really as feasible right now, but we still have lots of interesting things that we can do through online surveys and that sort of thing. Even though we're not able to sort of occupy the lab space together, and we're not getting together in person, we are still having lots of meetings, and those meetings have been going really well, and it does feel like that we still have a strong connection between everyone in the groups. Yeah, that's a hard one. During quarantine, I was still really quite busy with work, and in some things, there was new work that was generated because of everybody isolating. So I didn't really have any problems keeping myself busy. We did have some problems keeping my 5-year-old busy. The the most important, there's, I guess, two things I think that are important for people to remember when we're in a situation where we're forced to be physically isolated from a lot of people, is that even a quick phone call to connect with someone can do so much to change how your day unfolds. So we often underestimate the effect of small interactions like that. But 5 minutes to call a relative or a friend, um, is going to be really quite important in terms of how you're feeling. So don't underestimate how important those small connections, even if they're not perfect, even if they're not as good as if you could see those people in person, don't underestimate what they can do for your well-being. The other thing that I think is really important for coping during these times is to think about other people who might be in a worse situation than you, that might be even more isolated. What difference might it make to them if you give them a quick phone call or have a video chat?